When my fiancé proposed, we agreed on one thing immediately. No expensive engagement party, no destination vacation. We'd save the money for the wedding. Instead, we'd spend one long weekend together somewhere quiet. Just us. No phones, no work, no city noise. After weeks of scrolling through listings, we found what looked like the perfect Airbnb. The pictures were gorgeous, a luxury cabin tucked deep in the mountains, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the forest, a stone fireplace, a rainfall shower, a cedar hot tub. It looked like something out of a travel magazine. The reviews were mostly positive. A few people mentioned that the owner was eccentric, but every Airbnb has reviews like that. The price was surprisingly low. Looking back, it should have been my first clue. We arrived just after sunset. The GPS lost signal about 15 minutes before we reached the property. The road narrowed until it became a little more than gravel winding through dense trees. Eventually, we saw the cabin. At least, something that vaguely resembled the cabin from the photos. The shape was the same. The reality wasn't. The wood siding was gray and weathered. Half the porch railing leaned outward. Several windows were cloudy from broken seals. One of the exterior lights flickered constantly. The place looked 20 years older than the listing. I looked at Tyler. This can't be it. He double-checked the address. Well, it is. We sat there for a minute hoping we'd somehow made a mistake. We hadn't. When we got to the front door, it was actually unlocked. Inside wasn't much better. The furniture matched the listing photos, barely. The couch sagged. The rug smelled damp. Several light bulbs were burned out. The rainfall shower turned out to be a shower head that dripped from 6 different places. The hot tub? It technically existed. It was indoors, tucked into a little room off of the living area. The water was cloudy. There were dead insects floating on the surface. Something green clung to the edges. Tyler lifted the cover, looked inside for maybe 3 seconds, and said, "Absolutely not." I started laughing because I didn't know what else to do. There's no way we're going to stay here. This is absolutely disgusting. He wrote the host a message immediately. The response came almost an hour later. Rustic properties are not hotel resorts. The cabin matches the listing. Tyler sent photos. The host replied again. "If you'd like to leave, you're welcome to. Refunds are not available." That irritated us more than it scared us, at least at first. We unpacked anyway. We were tired from the drive. It was too dark to drive back down unfamiliar mountain roads anyway. Every nearby hotel was over an hour away. We agreed we'd survive one weekend, maybe make it a funny story later. That first evening, I kept noticing little things. The cabin creaked constantly, not unusual. Old buildings settle, trees sway, wood expands, except the sounds didn't feel random. Sometimes, I swear, I thought I'd heard a single footstep above us. Then nothing. Sometimes 3 slow creaks would travel across the ceiling, then stop directly wherever I happened to be standing. I mentioned this to Tyler. He smirked. Probably squirrels. I don't think squirrels sound like footsteps. They do when you're already creeped out. He kissed my forehead. You've watched too many horror movies. This place is just gross. Maybe he was right. After dinner, I went to take a shower. The bathroom mirror was spotted and cracked with age. The lights buzzed faintly. Steam filled the room within minutes. Halfway through washing my hair, I stopped. I had the unmistakable feeling someone was watching me. Not a vague feeling, a physical one. The kind that makes every tiny hair on your arm stand up. I shut off the water. Silence. I pulled back the curtain. Nothing. For some reason, I had locked the bathroom door when I decided to take a shower. I don't know why. I looked. It was still locked. I laughed at myself, finished my shower, got dressed, and never mentioned it. The next morning, Tyler wanted to go on a hike. I'm not really a hiking person, but I said yes, mostly just because I wanted to get out of the cabin. The forest was beautiful. Fresh air helped my peace of mind. By lunchtime, I had almost convinced myself I'd overreacted. Then we came back. The front door was unlocked again, even though we had locked it. Tyler frowned. I know I locked it. Inside, nothing appeared stolen. Nothing was broken. Everything looked exactly as we'd left it. Except our suitcase had been moved. Only a few inches. Just enough that I noticed. Tyler wasn't convinced. He insisted we probably remembered it wrong. Maybe. But I knew where I'd left it. I remember these kinds of things. That night we decided to build a fire. Around 10, the power flickered. Once, twice, then came back. A few minutes later we heard it. 3 knocks from outside the wall. Not the front door, not outside. Inside. Knock, knock, knock. Tyler stood up immediately. What the hell was that? I told him I didn't know. He knocked back. Silence. Then, 3 knocks answered. From somewhere further down the wall. We looked at each other. Neither of us smiled. He grabbed a flashlight and spent 20 minutes checking every room. Attic, closets, bathroom, nothing. Must be the pipes, he said. We've been drinking. We're probably getting paranoid. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I got up to use the bathroom. As I walked past the hallway mirror, I froze. Behind me, just for a second, I thought I saw someone standing in the doorway of the hot tub room. I spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. I told myself it had to have been a reflection or a shadow, an exhaustion trick. I hurried back to bed. The next day, Tyler drove into town to buy groceries. I stayed behind. That decision still bothers me. About 30 minutes after he left, I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow. Measured. There wasn't an upstairs. At least, there wasn't supposed to be. The cabin was 1 story. The footsteps continued. Back and forth. Directly above me. I called Tyler, but no signal. Of course. Footsteps stopped. Then I heard something else. A door closing. Very softly. But as I walked back into the hallway, I noticed something strange. One section of the wall sounded hollow. Everywhere else produced a dull thud. That spot echoed. I ran my hand across the wood paneling. Near the baseboard, I found fresh scratches. Tiny, as though something heavy had been slid across the floor many times. Tyler laughed when I showed him, until he knocked on the wall himself. His expression changed immediately. He knocked again, hollow. He spent the next hour examining the hallway. Eventually, he noticed a narrow seam hidden behind an old coat rack. There was a door, perfectly disguised to match the paneling. No knob, no handle, just wood. I wouldn't open it. We called the host. Straight to voicemail. We called Airbnb. No answer. By now it was nearly midnight. Tyler looked at me. I'm opening it. I told him not to. He disappeared outside. A minute later he came back carrying a pry bar from the trunk. The first pull loosened the trim. The second cracked the frame. The third, the door opened. The odor hit us first. Dust, old wood, something stale. The flashlight beam revealed a narrow passage. It ran behind the walls of the cabin. Not insulation, not crawl space. A hallway, wide enough for a person to walk through comfortably. Shelves lined one side. There was a folding chair, a lantern, empty food cans, blankets, water bottles. Someone had lived there. My stomach turned, and the passage continued behind every room. Tiny drill holes looked out through knots in the wood. Some were no longer than a pencil eraser. Others hid inside decorative vents. One overlooked the bed. Another faced the shower. Another looked directly at the couch. Whoever built the passage had designed it to watch the entire cabin without ever being seen. Then Tyler found something. A notebook. Dozens of dates, names, check-in days, check-out days, short observations. Couple from Texas, stayed 2 nights. Family with twins, loud children. Woman traveling alone, read until after midnight. The most recent page wasn't finished. At the top was my name, just my first name, nothing else. Yet, Tyler whispered, "We're leaving." As we backed out of the passage, we both heard it. A floorboard, somewhere deeper inside the hidden hallway. Not near us, farther back. One step, then another. Someone else was definitely in there. Tyler slammed the hidden door shut. We grabbed our things, our wallets, keys, and phones, and ran. As we drove away, I looked back once. Someone was standing in the front window, watching us leave. I couldn't make out a face, just a silhouette, perfectly still. The police met us at the bottom of the mountain. We took them back. By then, the cabin was empty. They found the hidden hallway. They found the observation holes. They found the chair, the blankets, everything but the notebook. And they never found another person. The host claimed he'd inherited the property from an uncle and had never known the hidden passage existed. He denied writing in the notebook, denied living there, denied everything. The police couldn't prove otherwise. The case eventually went cold. The cabin was condemned. A year later, I looked it up out of curiosity. The listing had been taken down. According to county records, the new owners demolished the cabin completely. People tell me I should feel better knowing it's gone. I don't, because whoever stood somewhere inside those walls that night walked away. Sometimes, when I stay in a hotel or a rental house, I'll unpack my suitcase and catch myself staring at the walls. I've spent the last 4 years trying to come up with a rational explanation for what happened to my friend Kendra and me at Crater Lake National Park. I can't. I've gone through every possibility: altitude, exhaustion, dehydration, coincidence, even carbon monoxide from the camp stove, even though we barely used it. Nothing explains all of it. Before I tell you what happened, you should understand why Crater Lake feels different from almost anywhere else. If you've never been there, it isn't just another mountain lake. The lake sits inside the collapsed crater of Mount Mazama, a volcano that erupted roughly 7,700 years ago. The mountain literally blew itself apart, leaving behind a caldera that slowly filled with rain and snowmelt over thousands of years. The water is unbelievably blue because it's incredibly pure. There aren't rivers flowing into it. It almost feels too perfect, like someone carved a giant hole into the earth and filled it with glass. When you're standing on the rim, it doesn't feel like you're looking at a lake. I'd just finalized my divorce a month earlier, and Kendra convinced me We needed to celebrate by doing something we'd always talked about for years. Freedom hike, she called it. Neither of us were beginners. We'd backpacked all over Oregon and Washington. We knew how to read maps, filter water, handle wildlife, and stay calm when things went sideways. We were prepared. The first strange thing happened before the sun even went down. We'd planned a 12-mile hike before settling into our campground. According to our watches, we started just after 9 in the morning. We stopped several times for photos. We filtered water. We ate lunch. Nothing felt rushed. When we got back to the trailhead, Kendra looked at her watch. 11:38. I laughed. No. She turned it toward me. It said 11:38. Barely 2.5 hours. 12 miles? Neither of us was even breathing hard. We both checked our phones. Same time. The GPS track showed we completed the entire route. At first, we thought maybe the distance marker online had been wrong. Then we talked to another couple in the parking lot. They'd done the exact same trail. It took us almost 6 hours, the husband said. I remember looking at Kendra. Neither of us said anything because we both knew exactly how long we'd been walking. Or at least, we thought we did. That night, the campground was busy. Families, campfires, kids roasting marshmallows, people laughing, having a good time. It wasn't isolated at all, which somehow makes what happened later even harder to explain. After dinner, we set up my camera to do a time-lapse of the stars. Crater Lake is one of the darkest places I've ever been. Once the last campfires died down, the sky almost stopped looking real. The Milky Way stretched from one horizon to another. Around 10:30, Kendra pointed upward. Did you see that? Something had crossed the sky. It moved in a perfectly straight line, like a laser beam. Then it stopped. Then it slowed down, and then it stopped again. I actually laughed. What am I looking at? Neither of us spoke after that, because the light, it didn't blink. It didn't move. It simply hung there. Then it changed direction without making an arc. It was suddenly somewhere else, like someone had skipped a few frames in reality. I remember standing up. The campground was completely silent. Not quiet, silent. No wind, no insects, no people talking. Even the trees looked frozen. Kendra whispered, "Do you hear that?" "I don't hear anything." "No," she said. "I mean exactly that." I realized what she meant. Silence has texture. This was not silence, it was absence. Then everything became strangely illuminated. It's so hard to describe. It was like my body still had weight, but it felt optional. Every step took almost no effort. The air felt thicker than normal, but somehow easier to move through. Imagine walking underwater without getting wet. Or walking in a dream where gravity only half works. I looked toward the neighboring campsites. Everyone was still there, or at least it looked like they were there. But nobody moved. Not one person. The flames from nearby campfires weren't flickering the way that they were before. They almost looked frozen. Not extinguished. Paused? Kendra reached toward one of the picnic tables. Her hand stopped an inch above it. She looked at me with the strangest expression. "It feels farther away than it looks." I walked over. She was right. It took me several steps to cover what should have been maybe 2 feet. Distance no longer matched movement. It felt like space had stretched, not visually, physically. The stars overhead seemed lower, close enough that I caught myself reaching upward, Neither of us panicked. That's the part that bothers me the most. We should have panicked. Instead, everything felt perfectly normal, like our brains had decided this was exactly how the world had always worked. I remember telling Kendra, completely calmly, "I think we're somewhere else." She nodded. "I know." Not, "What do you mean?" Not, "Don't be ridiculous." Just, "I know." Time stopped meaning anything. I don't know whether we stood there for 30 seconds or for 3 hours. I remember walking across the campground, except it wasn't really walking. It felt more like drifting, floating even. One step carried me much farther than it should have. The next step barely moved me at all. The air shimmered around every tree like heat rising from asphalt. Only it was 45 degrees outside. Then I noticed something else. The stars. They weren't moving. The Earth should have been rotating. Time-lapse photography should have captured streaks. Everything overhead remained perfectly still, like someone had pressed pause on the sky. The bright object we'd seen earlier was gone, or maybe it had never been there. I honestly don't know. The next thing I remember is sunlight, birds, people making coffee, bustling about, someone laughing 2 campsites over. I was sitting in my camp chair with my boots still on. Kendra was asleep against the picnic table. My battery in my camera was dead. The memory card contained almost 800 photographs. Every single image was identical. The stars hadn't moved, not 1 fraction of an inch. It looked like the exact same frame copied hundreds of times. The timestamps covered nearly 7 hours. Neither of us remembered any of them. When Kendra woke up, the first thing she said was, "My ears hurt." Mine did too. Behind my right ear, near the hairline, were 3 tiny red marks, almost perfectly spaced. Not scratches, not bug bites, like tiny little pinpoints. Kendra had nearly identical marks behind her left ear. Mirror images. We photographed them. By that evening, they had almost disappeared. Within 2 days, they were gone completely. We drove home without really talking about it. Over the next few weeks, we compared memories. Every detail matched. The frozen campfires, the strange gravity, the silence. The feeling that distance had stopped behaving correctly. Even the sentence I'd spoken, "I think we're somewhere else." She remembered it word for word. We've never gone back to Crater Lake. I still love that place. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever witnessed. But sometimes I wonder if, for a few hours that night, we weren't standing inside of a campground at all. Maybe we were standing in the exact same place, just somewhere our world occasionally overlaps with something we aren't supposed to see. And if it hadn't have been for those identical marks behind our ears, I think I would have convinced myself that it was all just a dream. The first time I ever suffered from sleep paralysis, I had no idea what it was. I hadn't even heard the term before. If someone had tried to explain to me back then, I probably would have laughed it off. At the time, I was in college. I'd grown up in the country, but I'd moved to a big city for school and was living in an ancient dormitory that honestly probably should have been condemned. The building had been standing for well over 100 years. Students loved telling ghost stories about it. Supposedly, it had been an asylum once, or a hospital, depending on who you asked. Every floor seemed to have its own version of the story, and every upperclassman had a friend who'd claimed they'd seen something. I never believed any of it. Old buildings make noises. That's all I thought. The pipes knocked, the floors creaked, the radiators hissed. Sometimes you'd hear footsteps in the hallway at 3 a.m, only to remember that you lived in a college dorm full of students who never slept. None of it bothered me. The room itself wasn't exactly comfortable. It was tiny, always cold. The heater barely worked. There were cockroaches from time to time. The mattress felt older than I was. But when you're in college, you don't really care. You're exhausted all the time anyway. Sleep was actually my biggest problem. People were constantly laughing in the hallway, slamming doors, coming back from parties at 2 or 3 a.m. I eventually bought a little white noise machine just to drown everyone out. It became part of my nightly routine. One particular night, I'd gone to bed after studying for what felt like forever. For once, I slept incredibly well. I remember waking naturally before my alarm and thinking how strange it felt to actually feel rested. The room was mostly still dark, but I could see that faint blue-gray light beginning to seep around the edges of the curtains. That strange time of morning where the sun hasn't really risen yet, but night is clearly ending. I figured it had to be around 5:30 or 6. I even remember smiling. I thought, perfect. I beat my alarm. I tried to sit up, but nothing happened. It was strange, but not frightening, not at first. I remember thinking maybe one of my legs had fallen asleep. So I tried swinging them over the edge of the bed. Nothing. It was the strangest sensation. Inside my head, I was moving. I could picture myself sitting upright, but my body simply wouldn't respond. I tried my arms, nothing. I tried lifting my head, nothing. There wasn't any numbness, no pins and needles. I could feel everything. I just couldn't make any of it move. That's when I heard it. A low, electric buzzing, almost like standing underneath high-voltage power lines. Except it wasn't outside. It sounded like it was filling the room. It started softly, then slowly became louder. At almost the exact same moment, my body, it began vibrating. Not violently, just enough that I could feel the frame trembling underneath me. The vibration spread through the mattress, into my back, into my chest. I remember staring toward my dresser. There was a tiny refrigerator sitting on top of it. The bottles inside began softly rattling against each other. I could actually hear liquid sloshing around. That's the moment my confusion became fear. This wasn't an earthquake. We didn't have earthquakes there. Besides, if the whole building were shaking, I'd hear people. I'd hear someone yelling. The hallway would be alive. Instead, everything outside my room was completely silent. Then I looked at my alarm clock. Instead of showing the time, it was blinking. 12, 12, 12. Like the power had gone out during the night. Only my white noise machine was still running. The room hadn't lost power. The clock made no sense. I kept trying to move. Nothing. The buzzing, it grew louder. The vibration became stronger. Then the room got darker. Not because the sun disappeared, because something was blocking what little light there was. At the foot of my bed, there was a figure. I swear it had to be at least 8 feet tall. It wasn't detailed. It was almost completely black, like someone had cut the shape of a person out of the darkness itself. But around its outline, there was this strange green glow. Not bright, not glowing like a light bulb, more like the faint green edge you sometimes see around old television screens. I couldn't make out a face, just impossibly broad shoulders, long arms, a head. It wasn't moving. It was simply standing there, watching me. Every instinct in my body screamed to run. I couldn't even lift a finger. Then I noticed something else. A red light. It was leaking through the cracks around the dorm room door. Not flashing, not moving, just red. I'd lived in that room for months. I'd never once seen red light come through that doorway, not ever. The figure didn't seem interested in the door. It was looking at me, or at least I felt absolutely certain it was. Then something pressed down on my chest. Not all at once, slowly, like someone placing both hands on you and gradually leaning their weight forward. I could still breathe, but only barely. Every breath felt smaller than the last. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the buzzing. I remember thinking, so this is how people die in their sleep. I tried to scream out. Nothing came out. I tried to close my eyes. I couldn't. The figure began moving. It didn't walk. It simply felt closer. 1 second it was standing at the end of the bed, and then the next, it was halfway there. The buzzing became almost deafening. The bottles in the refrigerator clinked together so hard I thought they might break. The entire room felt alive with vibration. Then that figure was beside me, right beside me, towering over the bed, still faceless, still surrounded by that impossible green outline. I remember trying to focus on where its eyes should have been. There was nothing there, just darkness. For one horrifying second, I had the overwhelming certainty that I knew I was awake. I was not dreaming. I was awake, completely aware, unable to move, unable to escape. Everything stopped. The buzzing vanished. The pressure disappeared. The bed became perfectly still. I bolted upright so fast I nearly fell out of bed. My room looked completely normal. Morning sunlight was pouring through the curtains. My refrigerator wasn't shaking. The red light under the door was gone. My alarm clock was displaying the correct time. The only thing that hadn't changed was how hard my heart was pounding. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes trying to convince myself it had been a nightmare. Except, I'd never felt so certain I had been awake. Years later, I finally learned what sleep paralysis was. People told me the shadow figure was common. The pressure on your chest was common. Even the buzzing. They had explanations for all of it. Maybe they're right. I don't know. But I've never been able to explain one thing. If I was dreaming, why do I still remember every detail of that room exactly as it was that morning? The blinking clock, the rattling bottles in the refrigerator, the red light beneath the door, and the feeling that whatever stood beside my bed knew that I couldn't move. I've had sleep paralysis since then. Nothing has ever frightened me as much as that first time. Because that first time, I truly believe something had come into my room. The second time I had sleep paralysis was somehow even more terrifying than the first. Not because of what I saw, because of what I can't explain. At the time, I had recently graduated college and moved back in with my parents for a few months while I figured out what I was going to do next. I was trying to save money before moving out of state. Like a lot of people in their early 20s, I felt like my whole life was sitting in limbo. My parents' house was the complete opposite of my old college dorm. It wasn't old, It wasn't creepy. It had been built brand new before my family moved in. No strange history, no ghost stories, no creaky floors. Nothing about it ever made me uncomfortable. It was just home. I was also trying to get healthy at the time. I'd become fanatical about eating clean. Most nights I'd grill fresh salmon, trout, tilapia, swordfish, whatever looked good at the grocery store. Looking back, I was probably eating far more fish than anyone should. That particular evening, I bought a beautiful piece of rainbow trout. I remember thinking just for a second that something looked off about it. It wasn't spoiled, just unappetizing. I almost threw it away, honestly. Instead, I cooked it anyway. By 11, I went to bed. Because it was summer, my bedroom window was open. My dad hated running the air conditioner unless it was absolutely necessary. I actually loved sleeping with the windows open. The crickets, the breeze, the smell of dry grass. It was peaceful. I fell asleep quickly. Sometime during the night, I woke up. Or at least I thought I did. Maybe the room was dark enough that I couldn't tell at the time. When I moved home from college, everything in my bedroom had ended up in strange places. My alarm clock wasn't on my nightstand anymore. It was sitting on the floor beside my bed. My first instinct was simple. Lean over, check the time, go back to sleep. I tried to turn my head. Nothing. I frowned. I tried again. Nothing. Then I tried to sit up. Still nothing. The realization hit me all at once. Not again. I remembered exactly what had happened in college. The paralysis, the panic, the certainty that I was awake. I tried to convince myself it wasn't the same thing. Maybe my arm had fallen asleep. Maybe I was lying on a nerve. I tried rolling sideways. Nothing. I even tried throwing myself off the bed. Inside my head, I was moving. My body refused. The familiar heaviness settled across my chest. Not painful, just enough to make every breath feel deliberate. I wasn't gasping. I just suddenly became aware of every inhale, every exhale. My heart started racing. I remember thinking, please don't let this be happening again. That's when I noticed the window, or rather, I noticed I couldn't see it anymore. Normally, even in the middle of the night, there was enough moonlight that I could make out the trees outside. Now, the entire window had gone black, like something was standing in front of it. It was enormous, at least 7 or 8 feet tall, not detailed, just a silhouette. It wasn't shaped quite right. The shoulders seemed impossibly wide. The arms seemed just a little too long. I couldn't make out a face, but I knew exactly where it was looking. At me. I remember trying to tell myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe someone was outside. Maybe my eyes hadn't adjusted. Maybe none of those thoughts lasted very long, because the figure never moved. It didn't sway, it didn't breathe, it just simply stood there, blocking every bit of moonlight from the window, watching. I tried screaming, "Mom!" Nothing, or at least I couldn't tell. Inside my head I was shouting as loudly as I could, "Mom! Dad! Please!" I don't know if any sound actually came out. That was almost worse than being unable to move, not knowing whether I was making any noise at all. I remember thinking, if I can't move my body, can I even speak? The figure stayed exactly where it was. It never took a step, never reached toward me, never made a sound. Somehow, that felt even more threatening. My eyes never left it. I kept waiting for it to move, to do something, anything. Then, everything changed. There wasn't a flash. There wasn't a loud noise. One moment, I was staring at the figure in my bedroom. The next, I was standing beside my parents' bed. I was grabbing my mother's shoulder with both hands, shaking her hard. "There's someone in my room." My dad shot upright. "What?" "There's somebody in my room." He grabbed the baseball bat he always kept beside the bed and rushed down the hallway. I followed him. Every light came on. He checked every room, every closet, every window, every door. Nothing. No broken lock, no footprints, no sign anyone had ever been there. He looked at me and said, "Were you dreaming?" I couldn't answer, because I honestly didn't know. I was standing in their bedroom. That part was real. I remember seeing the figure. That felt real. But I have absolutely no memory, none, of leaving my own bed. To this day, I can't tell you how I got from one room to another. I don't remember opening my bedroom door. I don't remember even walking down the hallway. I don't remember crossing the living room. It's just gone. Like someone cut that part out of the night. Eventually, I learned deeper what sleep paralysis really was. I've read about the hallucinations, the false awakenings, dreams that blend into reality. Maybe that's exactly what happened. Maybe I really did sleepwalk. Maybe my terrified brain filled in the rest afterward. I honestly don't know. But there's one detail that still bothers me. The next morning, my bedroom window was closed, locked. I had gone to bed with it wide open. I remember the crickets. I remember the cool night air. I remember hearing the trees outside before I fell asleep. My parents both insisted they hadn't touched the window. Neither had I, at least, not that I can remember. Maybe I closed it myself before going to bed and simply forgot. Maybe my father closed it after checking the room. Maybe there's a perfectly ordinary explanation. I've spent years trying to come up with one, and I still haven't found it. All I know is this. I went to sleep in my childhood bedroom. I woke up unable to move. Something was standing between me and the window, and somehow I ended up in my parents' room with no memory of ever leaving my own. The scariest night of my life didn't begin with someone pointing a weapon at me. It began with a decision, one that I knew was wrong before I even made it. This happened when I was 22. If I had listened to the feeling in my gut that morning, none of it would have ever went down. But I didn't. When you're young and desperate to be loved, your instincts become really easy to ignore. I was having an affair with a married man named Riley. Even saying that now makes me cringe. At 22, I had an endless supply of excuses for him. His marriage was over. He was sleeping in the guest room. They were basically roommates. He was only staying because of money, because of timing, because of the house, because of some new problem that always conveniently appeared right when I started asking too many questions. There was always another reason he couldn't leave, but somehow he always was about to. Every few weeks he'd tell me, "Just give it a little more time, baby." And I stupidly did, over and over again. Looking back, I don't think Riley ever intended to leave his wife. I think he enjoyed having someone young and wounded enough to believe that he would. You have to understand that I came from a family where love was very unpredictable. I learned to accept whatever scraps of affection people handed me because I never really believed I deserved anything better. Predators have a way of recognizing this in someone before you do. After almost a year of excuses, I had finally reached my limit. I was going to end it. Then Riley called. He wanted to spend the weekend together. Maybe our last weekend, he said. No phones, no interruptions, just us. He said he really wanted to talk. I wish I could tell you that I said no. Instead, I packed a bag. The drive started normally enough. We left Los Angeles early Saturday morning and headed towards Santa Paula. At first, Riley was charming in the way he always was when he felt me pulling away. He made jokes, touched my knee, told me I looked beautiful. But the farther away we got from the city, the quieter he became. His phone kept buzzing in the cup holder. Every time it did, he angled the screen away from me before answering. When I asked who kept texting him, he smiled. Just work. Of course, I didn't believe him. I had stopped believing almost everything he said months earlier. Still, I stayed in the truck. Eventually, he turned onto a narrow road that climbed into the hills. Branches scraped both sides of the truck. Dust covered the windshield. We drove for another 20 minutes before I finally asked where the campground entrance was. He laughed. There isn't one. What do you mean? We're camping out here. He pointed through the windshield at a clearing in the trees. No signs, no numbered campsites, no picnic tables, no bathrooms, no ranger station. Nothing. Just woods. Something inside of me immediately tightened. We parked near a creek and carried everything into the clearing. The place was beautiful in a lonely sort of way. Oak trees, tall grass, smooth stones along the river, the narrow dirt path that seemed to vanish between the trees. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, everything felt slightly off. A bunch of cigarette butts near the creek. Someone had been there recently. Probably nothing. Still, I noticed it. We pitched the tent. Riley built a small fire pit with rocks, and for a while I tried to let the day be what he wanted it to be. I couldn't believe I'd let myself become this person. At one point, Riley was off near the truck pretending to take a work call. I had the unmistakable feeling that someone was watching me. Not the vague feeling you get when you're anxious, the physical kind, like when your body knows something before your mind does. I turned around slowly. Nothing, just trees. I stood there listening. The woods were completely still. No birds, no insects, just the creek moving over the rocks. When Riley came back, I almost mentioned it. Instead, I smiled. I didn't want another argument. By sunset, the temperature dropped. We built a fire and ate dinner out of plastic containers. The conversation became more and more forced. He kept telling me how good it was to get away, how much he needed this, how much he needed me. I remember looking at him in the firelight and realizing I didn't believe a word of it anymore. I already knew the relationship was over. I think he did too. Neither of us wanted to say it. Later, we crawled into the tent. I played make-believe and let myself forget everything. Then Riley sat up and patted his pockets. Damn it. I'm out of cigarettes. I laughed because I honestly thought he was joking. So quit. He didn't laugh. I'm gonna drive into town. I sat up. Right now? It'll only take 20 minutes. It's the middle of the night. So? Riley, we are in the middle of nowhere. I'll be back. You can't just leave me here. He was already pulling on his jeans. I remember this cold feeling spreading through me. Not from the air, from the realization that he really didn't care whether I was afraid. Riley, please don't go. He tossed a can of bear spray into my lap. Here you go, in case a bear shows up. But a bear was not what I was worried about. He gave this irritated little sigh, like my fear was an inconvenience. You'll be fine, babe. Then he took the truck keys and unzipped the tent. A moment later, I heard the engine start. Headlights swept across the trees. Then the sound of the truck faded down the dirt road until there was nothing left but the creek in the dark. I zipped the tent close. I checked everything twice, then lay there trying to breathe normally. I told myself he would be back soon. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself I was 22 years old and I could survive 20 minutes alone in a tent. Then I heard something moving outside. Dry leaves. A soft crunch. Then another. Probably an animal, I told myself. Then I heard it again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Slow, deliberate, not wandering. Getting closer. It stopped right beside the tent. I stared at the nylon wall inches from my face. I couldn't hear breathing, couldn't hear movement, just the presence of someone standing there, waiting. Almost a full minute passed. Then the zipper moved, not quickly, slowly. Like whoever was opening it didn't want to make any noise. The zipper kept moving, no answer. The opening widened enough just for a face to appear. A man that I'd never seen before. He looked almost embarrassed, like he'd interrupted me. He climbed inside, holding a hunting knife in one hand and a weathered sketchbook tucked under his arm. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I really am." That was what terrified me the most. Not the knife, not the fact that a strange man had just crawled into my tent in the middle of nowhere. It was how polite he sounded, like this was an inconvenience for us both. I tried to scream, but he raised the knife slightly. "Please, don't." His voice was calm. "I really don't want to hurt you. I just need you to cooperate for a few minutes." He tied my wrists carefully with what looked like a climbing cord. Not painfully, just tight enough that I couldn't pull free. "I'm sorry. I know this is frightening. It won't be long." Then he looked at me for a moment and said, "You have one of the most beautiful backs I've ever seen." For a second, I thought I had misunderstood him. Then he opened the sketchbook. Page after page, pencil drawings. Women's backs, different ages, different body types, no faces, no names, just backs. "I collect them," he said. My mouth had gone completely dry. "You know, I saw you at the gas station." My heart stopped. "You were wearing that backless blue dress." I had been, hours earlier. He smiled faintly. Then he added, "I got lucky." That was when I realized he hadn't stumbled across our campsite. He had followed us. He told me to turn around. I didn't move. He looked genuinely sad about that. Then he pointed the knife toward the sleeping bag. "Please." So I turned. I kept waiting for him to hurt me. Instead, I heard pencil on paper. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound was so soft and steady that it almost made everything worse. He was drawing me like this was some quiet afternoon in an art class. Not a crime, not a nightmare. A few minutes passed. Then he said, "You know, you really shouldn't trust that guy." I didn't answer. "That man you're with?" Scratch, scratch. "He lies to you." I closed my eyes. "You don't know anything about him." "Well, I know enough." He kept on drawing. "I saw you at the creek." Scratch. "I saw him checking his phone." Scratch. "I heard you ask if he was still going to leave her." I felt sick. He'd been close enough to hear us, hidden somewhere in the trees, watching, listening, all day. "He isn't going to leave her." His voice was gentle. That was the worst part. "He's stringing you along, darling. I know the type." I started to cry, not loudly, just silent tears I couldn't stop. He noticed. "I'm sorry." I almost laughed. He said it like he was comforting me, like tying me up in a tent was unfortunate but necessary. "Are you scared?" he said. "I know." He paused. Then he said, "You seem like a really nice person." His words almost sounded compassionate. The situation was terrifying. "I don't hurt them. The women I draw." I didn't ask what he meant by that. I didn't want to know. He shifted closer to finish some detail. I could smell dirt on his clothes, sweat, smoke, something metallic. His backpack sat near the entrance of the tent. It was old and stained at the bottom. I kept staring at it, wondering what else was inside. "How many?" I whispered. He looked up. "What? How many women have you done this to?" "Not nearly as many as I'd like." He said it quietly, almost wistfully. My stomach twisted. Then he smiled a little. "You'll be one of my favorites." I remember thinking that if I survived this, I would never be able to explain how terrifying it was to be complimented by someone holding a knife. The woods were silent. Too silent. Even the creek seemed farther away. I kept waiting for Riley's headlights, waiting for the truck, waiting for anything. The man kept drawing. At one point, he loosened the cord around my wrist. There. That's better. I didn't move. I was afraid if I moved wrong, he would change his mind about not hurting me. He noticed that, too. "I'm not a monster," he said. I didn't answer. He looked almost offended. Monsters leave women alone in the woods. For some reason, that was the sentence that broke something in me, because he wasn't wrong, and I hated him for it. The next few minutes stretched out forever. Pencil on paper, his breathing, my heartbeat. Then headlights swept across the tent. The man froze. The truck door slammed outside. Riley had come back. The man looked terrified. For the first time since he entered the tent, he seemed less calm than I was. He quickly cut the rest of the cord around my wrist. "Don't tell him." He shoved the sketchbook into his backpack. Before I could respond, Riley's voice came from outside. "What the hell is going on?" The stranger unzipped the tent and stepped out first. I pulled my shirt on with shaking hands and followed. Riley stood near the truck holding a pack of cigarettes. He looked at the stranger, then at me, then back at him. "Really, what the hell is going on here?" The stranger answered before I could. "She twisted her ankle." Riley frowned. "What?" "I was hiking nearby. I heard her calling for help." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mind felt like it had separated from my body. The stranger continued. "She said you went into town." Riley looked at me. "Did you hurt yourself, babe?" I stared at him. In that moment, I realized I was afraid of both of them. I was afraid of the stranger because of what he'd done, and I was afraid of Riley because I had no idea what he would do if I told him. He'd already left me alone out there once. What would happen if he got angry? What would happen if he didn't believe me? What would happen if the stranger panicked? There were no other campers, no ranger, no one. So I nodded. "Yeah, I slipped." Riley exhaled like he was annoyed. "Jesus, you're such a klutz, babe." The stranger adjusted his backpack. Then something small fell from his pocket into the grass. A wallet. Neither man noticed, but I did. Riley turned toward the cooler. "You want a beer, man?" The stranger shook his head. "No, I should go." He looked at me one last time. There was something almost pleading in his expression, like he wanted me to understand him, like he wanted forgiveness. Then he turned and walked into the trees. I waited until Riley's back was turned. Then I bent down and slipped the wallet into my jacket pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Riley didn't notice, because Riley never noticed anything. He was already opening a beer. "What a weird guy," he said. I stared at the trees where the stranger had disappeared. Yeah. That night, I didn't sleep. Riley fell asleep almost immediately. I lay awake beside him, staring at the roof of the tent, contemplating my life. Every sound outside made me flinch. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, every shift of wind. I kept thinking about that sketchbook. All those women with no faces. I wondered if any of them had told anyone. I wondered if any of them had been believed. I wondered if there were women in those pages who hadn't made it home. Then I looked over at Riley, sleeping peacefully. The man who had driven away and left me there. The man who would probably tell people later that I was dramatic that I overreacted, that some harmless hiker helped me when I got scared. I had never felt more alone. When dawn finally came, the inside of the tent turned pale gray. Riley rolled over and kept sleeping. I carefully reached into my jacket pocket and took out the wallet. Inside was a driver's license, a full name, and address. There was also a small photograph tucked behind one of the cards. It was old, bent at the corners. A woman's back. Not a drawing, a photograph. I put it back immediately. I didn't want to know. Riley woke up a few minutes later and crawled out of the tent to wash his face at the creek. The second he was far enough away, I grabbed my phone and called 911. My voice barely worked. I told the dispatcher where we were as best as I could. I told her a man had come into my tent with a knife. I told her I had his wallet. I told her I was afraid. She told me to stay where I was. I almost laughed. Where the hell else was I supposed to go? About 40 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled into the clearing. Riley came back from the creek looking confused and irritated. "What the hell is this?" One of the deputies asked if I was the person who called. I nodded. Only then, standing in the morning light, did I tell someone what happened. Riley kept interrupting. "What? What are you talking about? Why didn't you tell me? Are you serious?" The deputies separated us. One of them took the wallet from me. The other one asked me to show him the cord marks around my wrists. They were faint, but they were there. Not dramatic, not bloody, but enough. Riley stood near the tent staring at me like I'd betrayed him. Maybe I had. Maybe I should have betrayed him much sooner. When the deputies asked if I wanted to ride back with Riley or with them, I didn't hesitate. I got in that patrol car. As we pulled away, I looked through the rearview window. Riley was standing beside the tent. The fire pit was cold. The tent sagged in the morning air. The woods behind him looked completely ordinary, like nothing had happened there. I never saw Riley again. I never saw the man with the sketchbook again either. I don't know what happened after the deputies took his wallet. I don't know if they found him. I don't know if they found that sketchbook. Sometimes I wonder how many pages were in it. Sometimes I wonder how many women he had followed. And sometimes, when I think about that night, people ask me which man scared me more. The stranger who watched me from the woods, or the man who drove away in the middle of the night and left me there alone. The truth is, by sunrise, I wasn't sure anymore. I worked the overnight shift at a gas station for about 8 months when I was in college. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid a little better than the daytime shift, and honestly, most nights were so slow I could get homework done in between customers. The store sat just off of a state highway about 15 minutes outside of town. During the day, it was busy with commuters and truckers, but after midnight, it was mostly empty. Every now and then, someone would stop for gas, cigarettes, or an energy drink. But there were long stretches where I wouldn't see another person for 30 or 40 minutes. I usually worked alone from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. Most people assume working nights is scary because they're imagining someone trying to rob the place. That wasn't what bothered me. It was how quiet everything got. There was no traffic. Usually no customers, and no music beside whatever was playing softly through the speakers. Every little sound seems louder than it should. You start noticing things you'd never noticed during the day. The hum of the refrigerators, the buzzing of the fluorescent lights, the wind rattling the trash cans outside. Eventually, you get used to it. One Wednesday night, sometime around 1 in the morning, a man walked in and bought a pack of gum. He looked like he was in his late 40s or maybe early 50s. Ball cap, gray hoodie, jeans, pretty average looking. If you would have asked me to describe him later, I honestly would have struggled. He smiled, paid cash, wished me a good night, and left. Honestly, nothing about it stood out. About 20 minutes later, he came back. This time, he bought a candy bar. He smiled again. "Pretty slow tonight?" I laughed and said, "It usually is." He nodded like that answered some important question. Then he left. I remember thinking it was a little odd that he came back so quickly, but people forget things all the time. Maybe he wanted something sweet after all. Half an hour later, he walked back in. Bottle of water. Again, he paid cash. Again, he lingered just a little longer than necessary. "So, you always work this shift?" I nodded. He said nights must get lonely. I shrugged and said I didn't mind them. He smiled. "I bet you get some interesting people coming through." "Sometimes." And then he left. This is when I started to get uncomfortable. Not because he'd done anything wrong necessarily, but because something about it felt strange. Every trip was just far enough apart that I started relaxing before he'd walk in again. At around 2:30, he came back for a fourth time. This time, he bought a disposable lighter. I remember looking at it after I scanned it and thinking there was no way he actually needed this. He leaned against the counter. "You from around here?" I told him I went to school nearby. That was the truth, but I didn't tell him which one. He asked if I liked living here. I gave another vague answer. He looked around the empty store. "Guess it must get boring by yourself." I laughed politely because that's what women do when they don't want to make a situation with a man any worse. He smiled again. "You got a real nice smile." I thanked him. He left. I watched him through the front windows as he got into an older dark pickup truck. Instead of driving away immediately, he just sat there for maybe a full minute. Then he finally pulled out. The next customer didn't come in for almost 45 minutes. I was honestly relieved. I figured the weird guy had finally gotten whatever he wanted. Then the bell over the door rang. It was him. Again. This time he'd bought a bag of chips. I didn't even try pretending that this felt normal anymore. He looked at my name tag. Emily. I immediately wished I'd covered it up. He smiled. "That's a pretty name." I said thank you without looking up. He asked what time I got off. I lied. I said 8. He nodded. "Long night." I didn't answer. For the first time, the silence between us felt awkward. Not because either of us didn't have anything to say, because it felt like he was waiting to see whether I'd volunteer more information. I didn't. He eventually paid and walked out. About 10 minutes later, an older couple came in for gas and coffee. While they were inside, I looked out the window. The pickup truck wasn't there. As soon as they left, the truck pulled back into the parking lot. It was like he'd been waiting somewhere nearby until the other customers were gone. That was the moment my stomach dropped. I started replaying every conversation we'd had, every question, every compliment. None of it sounded threatening on its own. Together, it didn't feel harmless anymore. He walked back in one more time. Lottery ticket. That was it. One scratch-off ticket. He stood there scratching it off on the counter while making small talk. "You probably know everyone that comes in here." "Nope." "So you got a boyfriend?" I'd rather not answer personal questions. I said it as politely as I could. His smile didn't disappear, it just changed. Like he wasn't embarrassed, just amused. He finally folded the losing ticket in half, tossed it in the trash, and left without another word. After that, I didn't see him again for almost an hour. I kept checking the parking lot. Nothing. By then it was almost 6. The sky was starting to get lighter. My relief lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then I saw the pickup truck parked across the street. Not at a gas pump, not in our lot, just sitting, facing the store. I couldn't even tell if he was inside because the windshield reflected the sunrise. My manager was running late, opening the day shift. I stayed inside with the doors locked until she arrived. I didn't mention the truck because I wasn't even sure what I'd say. Some guy kept buying gum and water all night. It sounded ridiculous. She came in, I counted my drawer, clocked out, grabbed my bag, and walked to my car. The pickup was gone. I remember actually laughing to myself. I told myself I'd worked all night, gotten into my own head, and let my imagination run away with me. I started driving home. About 2 miles down the highway, I looked in my rearview mirror. There it was, 3 or 4 cars back. I told myself it was a coincidence. There are only so many roads out there. Then I made a turn I never normally made. The truck turned too. I waited another minute, made another random turn. So did the truck. By then I wasn't trying to convince myself anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep them on the steering wheel. I remember something my dad used to tell me. If you ever think someone's following you, don't drive home. So I didn't. The police station was only about 10 minutes away. I headed straight toward it. I kept checking my mirror the entire drive. The truck never got closer, never backed off. It just stayed there. Always the same distance behind me. When I turned into the police station parking lot, the truck slowed for a second. Then it kept going. It never turned in. It just drove past. I sat there with the engine running, staring through my windshield, waiting for it to come back. It never did. I don't know how long I stayed parked there. 5 minutes, maybe 20. I honestly couldn't tell. Eventually another patrol car pulled into the lot, and I remember thinking I probably should go inside. Instead, I just sat there a little longer, watching the road, waiting to see that truck again. It never came back. I still think about that night sometimes. Not because I know what he wanted, because I don't. Maybe he was harmless. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe pulling into that parking lot changed absolutely nothing. Or maybe it changed everything. I'll never know. This happened 3 years ago during the worst move of my life, and I've never talked about it until now. I had just turned 31. I had about $800 to my name, and I was driving across the country alone with everything that I owned crammed into the back of my car. Clothes, books, old hard drives, 2 boxes full of kitchen stuff I probably should have thrown away, a laundry basket full of shoes, and a plastic storage bin full of things I thought were too important to pack with everything else. My birth certificate, my passport, my dad's old watch, things like that. I was moving from Oregon to Pennsylvania for a job I wasn't even sure I wanted, but it came with health insurance and a salary that felt, at least at the time, like a rescue boat. The problem was getting there. Gas was expensive, food was expensive. Every hotel along the route seemed to be either too expensive or visibly unsafe from the parking lot. I had mapped out the drive carefully, trying to break it into chunks that I could survive, and on the second night, I decided to camp. I'd camped plenty of times before. Not a lot, but enough that I knew how to set up a tent, start a fire, and sleep with one eye open. I had a little 2-person tent, a sleeping bag, a headlamp, a pocket knife, and a can of bear spray my friend had insisted I take with me. The campground I picked was in Idaho, somewhere off a rural highway about 20 minutes past the last real town. Online, it looked normal. Cheap, basic. First come, first served. There were photos of families by a lake, kids riding bikes, dogs on leashes, old RVs, pine trees, picnic tables. It looked safe in the way campgrounds usually look safe. I got there just before sunset. That was my first mistake. The road into the campground was longer than I expected. It started paved, then turned into gravel, then narrowed between trees so thick they blocked out most of the sky. I remember checking my phone and seeing I had 1 bar, then no bars, then 1 bar again. When I reached the entrance, there was a wooden sign with the campground name on it, but the paint was peeling so badly I could barely read it. There was a pay box, a bulletin board with a faded map, and a little handwritten note taped under the glass that said, "No host on duty." That bothered me a little bit, but not enough to leave. I was tired in a way that made me stupid. I drove slowly through the campground looking for a spot, and it was empty. Completely empty. No families, no kids, no dogs, no RVs, no smoke from the campfires, just rows of vacant sites, each with a picnic table, a fire ring, and a little post with a number on it. I almost turned around right then. I remember actually slowing down near the exit road and thinking, this is weird. This is too weird. But then I told myself I was being dramatic. It was a weekday, it was late in the season, maybe everyone had gone home. Maybe the online photos were from summer. Maybe I was lucky and had the whole place to myself. Then I saw the old man. He was sitting at campsite 14, just sitting there in a folding chair beside an unlit fire. His campsite was strange because it didn't look like a campsite at all. No tent, no RV, no cooler, no lantern, no sleeping bag, just the folding chair and a battered blue pickup truck parked crookedly beside the trees. He was wearing jeans, suspenders, and a pale yellow button-up shirt that went all the way to his throat. His hair was white and thin. He had one of those narrow, weathered faces that looks carved out of wood. As I drove past, he turned his head and watched me. Not in a curious way, in a patient way, like he'd been waiting for me or something. I kept driving. I picked a site as far away from him as possible without being directly by the bathrooms, because I didn't want people walking past me at night if anybody else showed up. Not that there were any people around. That was the whole problem. I chose campsite 3. I parked with my headlights facing the road, just in case I had to leave quickly. I remember thinking very clearly, face the car toward the road. The air smelled like dust and pine needles. The sun was dropping behind the trees, and everything had that golden evening glow that makes you feel like you're in a memory. I tried to focus on that instead of the old man. I set up my tent fast. Then I pulled out my little camp stove, heated up a can of soup, and ate it sitting on the picnic table with my phone in my lap, hoping for service. Nothing. No bars. I walked around the site, holding my phone up like an idiot. Still nothing. The campground had gotten very quiet. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. There's a difference. Peaceful quiet has birds and leaves and insects. Empty quiet has the feeling of a room after someone has stopped talking. I was rinsing my spoon with a bottle of water when I heard gravel crunch behind me. I turned. The old man was standing at the edge of my campsite. I don't know how he got there without me hearing him approach sooner. There was gravel everywhere, dry leaves everywhere, twigs everywhere. But suddenly he was just there, maybe 15 feet away, holding a bundle of firewood in both arms. He smiled, not a big smile, just enough to show me he was trying. "Evening," he said. His voice was soft, dry, almost papery. I said, "Hello." He looked at my tent, my stove, my car stuffed to the windows with all my belongings. "Movin'?" he asked. I froze for half a second. It was obvious, I guess. Anyone could have figured that out. My car was packed full. There were clothes hanging from the back window, a pillow wedged against the passenger seat. Still, I didn't like that he said it. "Yup," I said. "Come a long way?" "Pretty long," I said. He nodded, like I had confirmed something. Then he stepped closer and held out the firewood. "Thought you might need this." "Oh," I said, that's okay. I'm not making a fire tonight." He looked at me kind of funny and tilted his head, and he said, "Well, you should." It's the way that he said it. It wasn't threatening exactly. It was worse than threatening. It was gentle, like he was correcting a child. I tried to smile. "I'm honestly probably just going to sleep soon, but thank you." He kept holding the wood out. I didn't know what else to do, so I took it. It was heavier than I expected, and the bark scraped at my forearms. "Thanks." He looked past me, toward my tent, then toward my car, then back at me. "You alone?" I lied automatically. "No, my boyfriend's meeting me here." The old man's smile changed. Not much, just enough. "Tonight?" he asked. "Uh-huh. What time?" I felt my stomach drop. I gave a little laugh, like the question was normal. "Soon." He nodded again, licked his lips. Then he looked toward the road, the way I had come in. "That's a long road in," he said. I didn't know what to say. "Yeah." "Easy to miss the turn after dark." I didn't answer him. He stood there for another few seconds. Then he said, "Well, you holler if you need anything." I said, "I will. Thank you." He turned and walked away. I watched him go. This time I heard the gravel under his boots, slowly crunching steps all the way down the road. I waited until he was out of sight, then immediately carried the firewood to the edge of the site and dropped it there. For some reason, I didn't want it near my tent. I know it sounds irrational, but I just didn't. By then, the sun had almost gone. The trees had turned black at the edges, and the sky above them was still pale but fading fast. I got ready for bed as quickly as I could. I brushed my teeth beside the car. I changed into sweatpants inside the tent. I put my keys, phone, pocket knife, and bear spray inside the little mesh pocket by my head. Before crawling into my sleeping bag, I checked the car doors, all locked. Then I checked them again, still locked. I got into the tent, zipped it up, and lay there listening. At first, there was nothing. Then a breeze moved through the pine trees. Then something small scurried through the leaves. Then, far away, I heard a truck door close. I told myself that was good. The old man was going to sleep. That meant I could sleep. But I couldn't. I lay there awake for what felt like hours, staring at the dark tent ceiling, watching shadows move across the nylon whenever the wind stirred the trees. But every few minutes, I reached up and touched the bear spray to make sure it was still there. At some point, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember is waking up to a sound, and it wasn't a loud sound. It was small, like a soft metallic clink. I opened my eyes. For a second, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered the campground, the move, the old man, the empty sights. I held my breath. The sound came again. Clink. It was just outside the tent, near the picnic table. I sat up very slowly. The tent was completely dark except for a faint grayness at the seams where the moonlight leaked through. I reached into the mesh pocket and wrapped my hand around the bear spray. Clink, then a scrape, like something being dragged across wood. I almost called out. I'm so glad I didn't. Instead, I turned my phone on and checked the time. 1:47 a.m. No service. Of course. I sat there for maybe 2 full minutes, barely breathing. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, not animal steps, human steps. They moved from the picnic table toward the front of my tent, then stopped. Right outside the zipper, I could see a shape through the nylon. Not clearly, just a darker patch against the dark. Someone was standing there. I stared at it, frozen. The shape didn't move. I could hear breathing. Very faintly, in and out, in and out. I gripped the bear spray so hard my hands started to cramp. Then a voice whispered, "You awake?" It was the old man. I didn't move, I didn't answer. The shape leaned closer. The nylon pressed inward slightly like he had put his hand against the tent. "You awake in there?" I still didn't answer. A long pause, then he chuckled quietly, almost kindly. "Good girl," he whispered. Every part of me went cold. I heard him step back. Then the footsteps moved away, slow crunch, slow crunch, slow crunch, back toward the road. I stayed sitting up, bear spray in hand, for I don't know how long, 10 minutes, 20, maybe more. Finally, when I couldn't hear him anymore, I forced myself to unzip the tent just enough to look out. The campsite looked empty. The picnic table was a dark rectangle in the moonlight. My car was still there. The trees were still there. I almost convinced myself that I had dreamed it. Then I saw what was on the picnic table. A mug. A white ceramic mug with a blue stripe around the rim. It had not been there when I went to sleep. I know it hadn't. I crawled out of the tent with my bear spray pointed in front of me. The mug was sitting in the center of the picnic table. Inside of it was coffee, still steaming. Beside it was a folded paper napkin. On the napkin, written in shaky block letters, were the words, "For the road." I backed away so fast I nearly tripped over the fire ring. That was it. That was the moment I decided I was leaving. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I didn't care that I was exhausted and I could hardly see straight. I didn't care that the road was dark and I didn't know where the next gas station was. I was leaving. I grabbed my sleeping bag and shoved it into the back seat without rolling it. I threw my shoes in after it. I collapsed the tent so badly, one of the poles snapped, and I didn't even stop to care. I just balled the whole thing up and stuffed it behind the passenger seat. The entire time I kept looking toward the road. Nothing, no movement, no sound. I got in the car and I locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys between the seat and the console. I had to dig for them with one hand while holding the bear spray up with the other. Finally, I got the key into the ignition. The car started, the headlights blasted across the campsite, and the old man was standing directly in front of my car. I screamed. He was about 20 feet away, in the middle of the site road, facing me. He had no flashlight, he had no lantern, nothing. Just that pale yellow shirt buttoned all the way up to his neck, and those suspenders hanging from his shoulders. He lifted one hand, not waving, just raising it, like he wanted me to wait. I threw the car into reverse. The tires spun in the dirt, and for one horrible second, I thought I was stuck. Then the car lurched backward. I hit the brakes, shifted into drive, and jerked around him as wide as I could without hitting a tree. As I passed him, he turned his head and followed me with his eyes. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't angry. He looked calm. He looked disappointed. I sped down the campground road so fast my packed boxes slammed into each other in the back. Branches scraped the sides of my car. Gravel sprayed underneath the tires. I kept expecting to see him in the rearview mirror somehow. I kept expecting headlights, but there was nothing behind me, just darkness. I made it to the highway and drove for almost 40 minutes before I saw another car. I didn't stop until sunrise. By then, I was in Montana, parked outside a gas station with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and a man in a landscaping truck filling up beside me. I sat there shaking, watching normal people buy coffee and breakfast sandwiches like the world hadn't just cracked open. Eventually, I went inside. I used the bathroom. I washed my face. I bought the largest coffee they had. When I came back out, I noticed my trunk wasn't closed all the way. It wasn't open, just not latched. I stood there staring at it. I honestly wasn't sure if I had closed it properly. I slammed everything into the car and was in such a panic, but I remembered closing the trunk. I remembered hearing it latch. For a while, I couldn't make myself touch it. Then the landscaping guy glanced over at me, and that somehow made me brave enough. I set my coffee on the roof, I took out my keys, and I opened the trunk. At first, everything looked normal. Boxes, bags, the plastic storage bin with my important documents. Then I saw something wedged behind the bin. A folding chair. Brown metal frame. Faded green fabric seat. Old. Dirty. Collapsed, neatly, and tucked into the corner of my trunk like someone had placed it there with care. I didn't own a folding chair. I stood there for so long that the gas station clerk came outside and asked if I was okay. I said yes. I don't know why. I took the chair out with 2 fingers, carried it to the dumpster behind the gas station and threw it in. Then I got back into my car and drove for 14 hours. I didn't camp again. I slept in my car at truck stops with the doors locked and a tire iron under my blanket. I spent money I didn't have on cheap motels whenever I could. I cried somewhere in Ohio because I was so tired I couldn't see straight. But I made it to Pennsylvania. A few weeks later, after I had unpacked most of my things, I tried to look up the campground. I couldn't remember the exact name because the sign had been so faded, but I knew roughly where it was. I knew the highway. I knew the little town nearby. I knew the turnoff. I searched maps for almost an hour. Nothing. There were campgrounds in the area, but none that matched. No little lake. No numbered sites laid out the way that I remembered. No reviews mentioning a missing host or a blue pickup truck. Or a strange old man. I told myself maybe I had the wrong location, maybe I was too tired, maybe I misremembered. Then about a month after the move, I was cleaning out the car. I found old receipts under the seats. A granola bar wrapper, a pen, a bottle cap, all the normal trash that builds up during a long drive. Under the passenger seat, shoved all the way toward the back, was a folded paper napkin. I already knew what it was before I opened it. Same cheap white napkin, same shaky block letters. I opened it up. It says, "For the road." I don't know when he put it there. I don't know if I put it there. I don't know how it got into my car. I don't know how the chair got into my trunk. And I don't know why, out of all the things he could have done, he chose to leave little gifts. That might be the worst part. Because threats make sense. Violence makes sense. A man standing outside your tent at 2 a.m. whispering to you makes a horrible kind of sense. But kindness felt like a trap. It stays with you. I still don't camp alone. And whenever I see an old man sitting by himself at a rest stop or outside a gas station or in a folding chair at the edge of the yard, I feel my whole body lock up before I can talk myself out of it, because some part of me is still back there, in that empty campground, in that tent, listening to him breathe outside the zipper, waiting for him to whisper my name. I'm going to tell you about a terrifying experience that I've never spoken about before with anyone. It happened during one of the strangest periods of my life. I was living with my boyfriend at the time. There wasn't anything dramatic happening between us. There wasn't abuse, or screaming, or some huge betrayal. Looking back, it was much more simple than that. We had moved in together too soon. I was young. I thought that was just what people did when a relationship got serious. Within a few months, I realized I'd made a huge mistake. He wasn't a bad person, he just wasn't my person. The hardest part was admitting that to myself. Money was tight, really tight. We'd rented this tiny second-floor walk-up apartment in an old gray building that had absolutely no charm whatsoever. It wasn't historic, it wasn't beautiful, it just was cheap. The walls were thin, the carpet was worn out, the windows looked onto another building. Everything inside seemed slightly crooked, nothing quite fit right. We eventually took on a roommate because we couldn't comfortably afford the rent ourselves. He was someone we'd known from years earlier. He took the only bedroom. My boyfriend and I slept on a fold-out futon in the living room. If you've ever slept on one of those every night, you know exactly how miserable they are. You can feel the metal bars underneath you. Every morning I'd wake up sore. We kept telling ourselves it was temporary, just until we got ahead financially. Looking back, I think I already realized I did not want to be there anymore. I just hadn't admitted it yet. Most evenings were exactly the same. We'd both come home from work exhausted, make something cheap for dinner, watch old VHS tapes because we found a thrift store that sold them for practically nothing. There was something comforting about old movies. The soft static, the fuzzy picture, the sound of the VCR rewinding after the credits. By 10 or 11, we'd shut everything off, leave a fan running because the apartment trapped heat, and try to go to sleep. Nothing strange ever happened there. No ghosts, no creepy neighbors, no unexplained footsteps. It just was an uncomfortable apartment filled with people who probably didn't want to be there either. One night, I miraculously fell asleep almost immediately. I was lying on my stomach with my head turned toward the television. From where I slept, I could see the entertainment stand, the television, the VCR, a cable box. Then, something slammed into the floor beside my head. The only way I know how to describe it is this. Imagine someone dropping a bowling ball from shoulder height onto a hardwood floor. Not a knock, not something falling off a shelf. An impossibly heavy impact. Wham! It was so loud that every muscle in my body tightened instantly. My eyes flew open. For a split second, I thought someone had broken into the apartment. The room was dark. The fan was still humming. I could hear my boyfriend breathing beside me. Everything was silent. I tried to push myself up. Nothing happened. At first, I thought I was simply frozen from being startled. I tried again. Nothing. That familiar feeling washed over me. Not again. I knew exactly what was happening, or at least I knew what had happened before. Sleep paralysis. I tried lifting one arm, nothing. I tried rolling toward my boyfriend, nothing. Inside my mind, I was moving normally. My body refused to cooperate. Panic arrived almost immediately. Unlike the first time it had happened, I wasn't wondering what was happening anymore. I knew, which somehow made it worse, because I also knew I couldn't stop it. The apartment suddenly felt occupied. I can't explain it any better. I didn't see anyone. I didn't see a shadow. There wasn't a figure standing in the room, but every instinct I had was screaming that someone else was there. I looked toward the entertainment stand. The cable box wasn't displaying the time anymore. Normally it always did whenever the television was off. Instead, the numbers were racing, changing so quickly I couldn't even read them. Digits, symbols, lines. It almost looked as if the display couldn't decide what it was supposed to show. I'd never seen it do that before. Then I looked at the VCR. Its clock was blinking 12, 12, 12, like the power had gone out. Except the fan was still running. The apartment's air conditioner was still humming. Nothing else had shut off. If we'd actually lost power, the fan would have stopped. It never did. I remember trying to make sense of it. Maybe the VCR had reset. Maybe the cable box was rebooting. Maybe my brain desperately wanted an explanation. Then I became aware of something else. Breathing. Slow, steady. Not my boyfriend's. His breathing was behind me. This was beside me. Right next to my head. Close enough that if I'd been able to turn even an inch, I felt certain I would have been looking directly at whoever or whatever was making it. Every instinct told me not to look. Not that I could have, even if I wanted to. The breathing continued. Inhale, exhale. Calm, patient, like someone kneeling beside the futon, listening to me panic. I tried to scream my boyfriend's name again and again and again. Inside my head I was shouting it, but nothing was escaping my lips. I don't know if any sound actually came out. I couldn't feel my mouth moving. I couldn't tell if my lips were opening. I only knew I was trying. The breathing never changed. It didn't become faster, it didn't become louder, it simply stayed there, waiting. The longer it continued, the more terrified I became. Not because it was doing anything, because it wasn't. Whatever was beside me didn't need to move. I already knew that I couldn't. I didn't know how long it lasted. Sleep paralysis destroys your sense of time. Maybe it was 30 seconds, maybe it was 5 minutes, maybe it was the whole damn night. It felt endless. Then, the breathing stopped. Not because I heard footsteps, not because something walked away, it simply just stopped. The silence that followed somehow felt even worse. A second later, my body lurched forward. I gasped, sat upright, every muscle suddenly belonging to me again. The apartment looked completely ordinary. The cable box displayed the correct time. The VCR still blinked 12. The fan continued spinning exactly as it always had. My boyfriend was still asleep, peacefully, completely unaware anything had just happened. I lay awake until sunrise. I don't think I slept another minute. A few weeks later, we broke up. I moved out. Looking back, ending that relationship was the right decision. It wasn't because of what happened that night. I'd already known, deep down, that I needed to leave. That experience just became tied to that apartment in my mind forever. Since then, I've lived in older buildings, nicer buildings, apartments with noisy pipes, paper-thin walls, neighbors who dropped things in the middle of the night. None of it ever sounded like that. I've heard bowling balls fall in bowling alleys. I've heard heavy furniture tip over. I've heard construction equipment hit concrete. Nothing has ever sounded like whatever landed beside my head that night. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed and the room is perfectly quiet, near the house settle. A pipe will knock. A neighbor upstairs will drop something. For just one impossible second, my heart still stops, because part of me expects to hear it again, that single impossibly heavy impact. Then, someone breathing beside my bed. I've read everything I can about sleep paralysis over the years. The hallucinations, the pressure, the feeling of another presence. There are scientific explanations for all of it. Maybe that's exactly what happened to me. I honestly hope it is, because if it wasn't, then I still don't know what made that sound, or who was breathing beside me while I couldn't move. My boyfriend Ryan used to joke that I had an overactive imagination. If a branch snapped in the woods, I'd assume someone was watching us. If I heard footsteps outside my apartment at night, I'd check the peephole 3 times before going to bed. Ryan wasn't reckless, he just believed that there was always a logical explanation for everything. And usually, he was right. That's why what happened during our camping trip still bothers me, because even he couldn't explain it. It started as a weekend getaway. Nothing adventurous, just 2 nights in a national forest we'd both been wanting to visit. We'd packed way too much food, borrowed a friend's tent, and planned on spending most of the weekend hiking, reading, and staying away from our phones. The drive in was beautiful. Towering pines, a narrow river running alongside the road, little pockets of sunlight cutting through the trees. By the time we reached the campground, there were only a handful of occupied sites. A retired couple in an RV, a family with 2 little kids riding bikes, another tent about 100 yards away that looked empty. It felt normal, comfortably ordinary. We set up camp, made sandwiches, and decided to take one of the shorter hiking trails before sunset. We hadn't walked more than 15 minutes before Ryan stopped. "Do you smell that?" At first I thought it was just stagnant water. Then I caught it. Rot. Not overpowering, just wrong. We followed the smell another 20 feet before I saw it. A squirrel. It was lying beside a fallen log, dead. Its body looked untouched except for its neck, which had been twisted almost completely backward. No blood, no bite marks, no missing flesh. It looked like someone had simply picked it up and broken it. Ryan crouched beside it. Probably a coyote, he said. But they didn't eat it. They get interrupted. He stood up and dusted off his hands. "Come on." That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The next morning we went farther down another trail. This time it was a rabbit. Same thing. No blood, no obvious injuries except the neck. Ryan frowned. "That's weird." A mile later we found 2 more. 1 squirrel, 1 raccoon, both dead, both untouched. Both lying out in the open like someone had carefully placed them there. By then even Ryan had stopped making jokes. "I'd never seen anything like this," he said. When we got back to the camp, I asked the campground host if there had been any reports of sick animals. He looked genuinely confused. "Sick? We found a bunch of dead animals." He shrugged. "That's nature. But they're not eaten. They usually are." That was the entire conversation. It felt like he wanted it to be over as quickly as possible. That evening, the family with the little kids packed up and left. It was strange because they'd really only just arrived. Ryan figured maybe one of the kids wasn't feeling well. I remember watching them drive away. The mother never looked toward our campsite. She kept staring into the trees behind it. Around sunset, something changed. The birds stopped, not gradually, all at once. One minute the woods were full of bird song. The next, nothing. Ryan noticed it too. "That's odd." We stood there, listening. No wind, no insects, no birds, just silence. I've spent enough time outdoors to know forests are never truly quiet. There's always something moving, always something calling. That evening there was nothing. Dinner felt uncomfortable. We kept talking louder than usual, almost like we were trying to fill the silence ourselves. Every little sound carried. The scrape of a fork, the zipper of a backpack, the hiss of our camp stove. After dark, we built a small fire. Not because we needed it, because sitting in complete darkness suddenly felt like a terrible idea. Around 10, we climbed into the tent. Ryan fell asleep almost immediately, as he always does. I didn't. Every few minutes, I'd hear something. Leaves shifting. A twig snapping, then nothing. Around midnight, I finally started drifting off. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not the quick rustling of a deer, not the cautious shuffle of a raccoon. Heavy. One step, pause. Another step, pause. They circled the campsite once, then stopped. I reached over and nudged Ryan awake. He listened. There, I whispered. He heard it too. The footsteps started again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Ryan unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. I don't see anything. The footsteps continued, closer now, but they weren't coming from one direction anymore. They seemed to move without moving, like the sound itself was shifting through the trees. Ryan grabbed the flashlight. He stepped outside while I stayed in the tent. He swept the beam across the campsite. Picnic table, fire ring, our car. Nothing. Then the trees. Nothing. He lowered the flashlight. Probably a deer. Before I could answer, crunch. Directly behind us. Ryan spun around so quickly the flashlight slipped from his hands and hit the ground. The beam landed sideways, pointing into the forest. Between two trees, someone was standing there. At least that's what I thought. It was too far away to really see clearly, maybe 60 feet, tall. Really tall, taller than Ryan. Perfectly still. The flashlight beam only reached its outline. It had long arms, narrow shoulders, the head tilted slightly to one side. Ryan whispered, "What the?" Neither of us moved. I wanted Ryan to shine the flashlight directly at it. The beam shifted for less than a second, and then, when it came back, the space between the trees was empty. It was simply gone. Neither of us spoke. Ryan slowly backed toward the tent. "Get inside." What was that? I don't know. That answer terrified me more than anything because Ryan always knew. Or at least he acted like he did. We zipped up the tent. Neither of us slept. Around 2 a.m, we heard something dragging across the ground. It wasn't walking, it was dragging, like a heavy branch being pulled over pine needles. It circled the campsite, once, twice, then stopped beside the car. The driver's side handle rattled. Just once, a small metallic click. Ryan grabbed the bear spray. We listened. Nothing. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, sometime before dawn, exhaustion finally won. I must have fallen asleep. Ryan shook me awake just after sunrise. "We're leaving." His voice sounded wrong, flat. He pointed toward the edge of the campsite. There, beside the picnic table, lay another dead animal. This time it was a fox. Its neck had been completely twisted around. No blood, no bite marks, no missing flesh, just placed there, like a message, like an omen. Ryan didn't even make coffee. We threw everything in the car exactly the way that it was. Sleeping bags halfway folded. The tent was covered in water, damp from the overnight. Chairs were still dirty. Neither of us said much as we drove toward the campground exit. About half a mile down the road, Ryan slammed on the brakes. Standing in the middle of the road was a deer. It wasn't moving, it wasn't eating. It wasn't even looking at us. It was staring into the woods. Its ears were pinned back. Every muscle in its body looked tense. Ryan honked. Nothing. The deer didn't react. Then, without warning, it bolted sideways into the trees. Not away from us, toward whatever it had been watching. Ryan whispered, "No." I looked where the deer had disappeared. For just a second, I saw a figure, not clearly, just enough. Too tall, standing perfectly still between the trunks, watching the road, watching us. Ryan hit the gas. Neither of us looked back. About 20 minutes later, we stopped at a diner for breakfast. We barely touched our food. Ryan finally said, "I'm not telling anybody about that." "Why?" "Because I don't want to sound insane." A week later, I called the ranger station anyway. I asked if there had been any kind of predator activity in the area. The ranger was polite. He said they had black bears, mountain lions, coyotes, the usual. Then I asked him something I'd almost talked myself out of asking. "Have people ever reported finding dead animals with broken necks?" There was a long pause. Finally, he asked, "What campground were you staying at?" I told him. Another pause. Then he said, "I'll never forget. We usually recommend people don't hike there after dark." "Why?" "We've had unusual reports." "What kind of reports?" "I'm sorry." His voice became noticeably more careful. "I can't really discuss visitor complaints." Before I could ask another question, he wished me a nice day and hung up. Ryan still refuses to talk about that trip. If I bring it up, he changes the subject. He says we probably just saw a person. He says predators sometimes leave kills. He says exhaustion can make ordinary things seem extraordinary, and maybe he's right, maybe. But every now and then, usually late at night, I'll remember the way the woods was silent, not quieter, but silent, as if every living thing knew something was walking between those trees. And the only safe thing to do was to stop making noise. When I was in my early 20s, I picked up babysitting jobs whenever I could. Most of them were pretty normal. This one wasn't. A family reached out through a friend of a friend. They were looking for someone to stay with their 3-year-old daughter for an entire weekend while they attended an out-of-state event. They lived in one of those huge houses that doesn't really feel lived in. Everything was spotless. Nothing looked out of place. There wasn't a toy sitting on the floor or a dish in the sink. It honestly felt more like walking into a model home than someone's house. The parents were friendly enough, a little cold, a little distracted. They rushed through everything I needed to know. Emergency numbers, bedtime, favorite snacks, where the extra blankets were. Then, almost as an afterthought, the mom smiled and said, "Oh, and no big deal, but we have cameras throughout the house." I said, "Oh, that's fine." She smiled back. "We like to check in." That didn't bother me at first. I wasn't exactly sure even what that meant. I guess, honestly, if I had kids, I'd probably want cameras too, I guess. Then, as I moved through the house, I started noticing how many there actually were. One above the front door, one above the kitchen, one pointed toward the living room, one over the playroom, one at the bottom of the stairs, one at the top of the stairs. Every time I looked around, I'd find another little black lens. By the time they left, I wasn't sure which rooms were being recorded, and if there had been any that they were hiding. The first couple of hours were uneventful. The little girl, mostly colored, watched cartoons and asked for snacks. She was surprisingly quiet. Then, out of nowhere, she looked toward the hallway and waved. "Hi, Bob." I looked up. Obviously, nobody was there. I smiled. "Who's Bob?" "My friend." "Oh." I figured she had an imaginary friend. Kids do that all the time. I didn't think much of it. About an hour later, she was drawing with crayons on the dining room table. I picked up one she dropped on the floor. She frowned. "No." "What?" Bob doesn't like when you move the crayons. I laughed. Well, I guess Bob is just gonna have to forgive me then. She didn't laugh. She carefully put the crayon back exactly where it had been. Then she whispered, "There." That was the end of the conversation. Later that afternoon, when I was making macaroni and cheese, a voice suddenly came from somewhere above me. "Is everything okay?" I nearly dropped the pot. It was her dad, speaking through one of the cameras. I looked up. There was a little speaker built into the bottom. Yep. Well, you guys look like you're having fun." Before I could answer, the little girl looked directly into the camera and started waving enthusiastically. "Hi, Daddy." Then she pointed toward the hallway. "Bob is still here." There was a brief silence. Her dad just chuckled. Okay, sweetheart. The camera went quiet again. I stood there wondering how long he'd been watching us, and if he had even heard what she said, or whether hearing about Bob had become completely normal. After dinner, I found myself constantly looking up, not because I thought the cameras were moving, because I kept wondering who was watching. Were her parents checking every few minutes? Every hour? Were they watching me eat? Watching me scroll through my phone while she played? Watching me yawn? I became weirdly self-conscious. I started smiling more whenever I noticed the camera. Then I realized how ridiculous that was. Around bedtime, she refused to brush her teeth. Then the screaming started. She threw her toothbrush, kicked the bathroom cabinet, kicked me. I was honestly shocked. Her parents had described her as the easiest kid you'll ever babysit. Well, she wasn't. She was stubborn, she was loud, she had these explosive tantrums that came out of nowhere. Then, just as suddenly, they'd stop, like someone had flipped a switch. After one particularly bad meltdown, she became completely calm. She looked over my shoulder, smiled, and said, "Bob says you're sorry." I slowly turned around. Obviously, nothing was there, but the way that she said it made the hairs on my neck stand up. When I looked back at her, she was already climbing into bed like nothing had happened. That first night, I barely slept. The guest bedroom had one of those tiny blinking lights mounted near the smoke detector. I couldn't tell if it was actually a smoke detector or another camera. I kept staring at it. Every time I rolled over, I wondered if somebody was watching me. The next morning, things got even weirder. Not because of ghosts, because of cameras. Every few hours, one of her parents would suddenly speak through them, sometimes just to say hello, sometimes to remind their daughter to eat. Once, while I was folding laundry in the living room, the mom's voice came through. "You can leave those. I'll do them when we get home." I froze. She'd been watching me fold laundry. I hadn't even realized the camera covered that part of the room. After that, I couldn't relax at all. I started wondering how many cameras I hadn't found. Was there really one in the guest room? The hallway? The dining room? Every room suddenly felt occupied, even when I was completely alone. That afternoon we were playing with blocks when the little girl suddenly stopped building. She looked toward the ceiling, waved. "Hi, Mommy." A second later, her mom's voice came through the speaker. "Hi, sweetheart." The little girl giggled. Then she pointed behind me. "Bob says hi, too." Silence. Her mom ignored it completely. Maybe she'd learned not to encourage imaginary friends. Maybe she hadn't even heard her. I don't know. Later that evening, I asked, "So, what does Bob look like?" She shrugged. "You know." "Nope, I don't know." "Yes, you do." "I promise I don't." She looked genuinely confused, like she couldn't understand why I wasn't seeing what she saw. Then she leaned closer and whispered, "He's right there." She pointed toward the corner behind me. I turned around immediately. There was nothing there except a floor lamp. When I looked back, she was already stacking blocks again. That night was worse. She woke up around 2 a.m. screaming. Not crying, screaming. I ran into her room expecting she'd had a nightmare. She was sitting straight up in the bed, pointing toward the bedroom door. "Bob doesn't want you to close it." The door was open. I hadn't even touched it. I asked if she'd had a bad dream. She just kept staring toward the hallway. After a minute, she laid back down like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep at all after that. I sat in the hallway outside her room until sunrise. Every now and then, I'd catch myself looking up at another camera, wondering if her parents were watching me sit there, wondering if they thought I looked ridiculous, or if they were asleep in some hotel hundreds of miles away and nobody was watching at all. By Sunday afternoon, I was exhausted. The parents came home just before dinner. The little girl ran over and hugged them. Then she looked up toward one of the cameras, waved, and said, "Bye, Bob." Her mom smiled. "Did you have fun this weekend?" The little girl nodded, then skipped away. I wanted to ask who Bob was. I wanted to ask why there were so many cameras. I wanted to ask if they ever felt like they were living inside a security monitor instead of a home. Instead, I just thanked them, collected my things, and left. When I got out to the car, I sat there for a minute before starting the engine. For the entire weekend, I'd never felt once like I was actually alone, even when the house was completely silent. Sometimes I think the creepiest part wasn't Bob. I guess kids have imaginary friends, right? That happens. It was the feeling that every room in the house was watching me. Even now, years later, I still catch myself wondering whether there was a camera in the guest room. And if there was, why?